Hello, my name is Ashley La Rosa and this is my UCFID. Today I'll be discussing the major concepts covered in chapters 1 through 10 of learning and behavior. So let's start off with chapter 1. Chapter 1 explains that change is always happening in the world and that learning helps us adapt to those changes. The chapter discusses natural selection and how behaviors develop because they help species survive, of course. Learning is defined as a change in behavior that occurs because of experience. One example is habitation, which happens when we become less responsive to something after experiencing it repeatedly. This chapter emphasizes that learning is an important survival tool for both humans and animals, and I obviously 110 completely agree. Chapter 2 looks at how psychologists study learning and behavior. Scientists use observations and experiments to understand why behaviors occur and how it changes. The chapter explains different research methods, including case studies, descriptive studies, and experimental studies. It also discusses why researchers often study animals, since many learning principles can be applied to both animals and humans. Now we're going to go to chapter 3. Chapter 3 introduces classical conditioning through the work of Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov discovered that dogs could learn to associate the sound of a bell with food, and eventually hearing that bell, that makes the dog start salivating. So this chapter explains how associations are formed between stimuli and how learned responses can develop over time. It also discusses extinction, which occurs when a learned response gradually disappears. Chapter 4 shows how classical conditioning occurs in everyday life. It helps explain how fears and phobias develop, why people may dislike certain foods after getting sick, and how advertising creates positive association with products. This chapter also discusses drug addiction and how certain environment or situations can trigger cravings because of learned associations. Now we're going to go to chapter 5. Chapter 5 introduces operant conditioning, which focuses on the consequences of behavior. B.F. Skinner found that behaviors followed by positive outcomes are more likely to happen again. Reinforcement strengthened behavior, which, for example, a student who earns a good grade after studying is more likely to continue studying. This chapter explains positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and different types of rewards that can influence behavior. Chapter 6 explains how reinforcement can be used to teach entirely new behaviors. Shaping involves rewarding small steps towards a desired goal. Chaining combines several smaller behaviors into a larger sequence. This chapter also discusses problem solving, creativity, superstition, and learned helplessness. These topics show that learning can be much more complex than simply forming habits. Chapter 7 discusses schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement does not always have to occur every time a behavior happens. So different schedules create different patterns of behavior. For example, slot machines use a variable ratio schedule because rewards are unpredictable. This type of reinforcement often creates very persistent behavior because people keep responding in hopes of receiving a reward. Now we're going to go to chapter 9. We're going to go to chapter 8. Chapter 8 focuses on punishment. Punishment decreases the likelihood that a behavior will occur again in the future. The chapter explains factors that make punishment more or less effective. It also discusses problems that can result from punishment, such as fear, avoidance, or even aggression. Because of these side effects, reinforcement is often considered a more effective way to encourage long-term behavior change. Now we're going to go to chapter 9. So chapter 9 examines how operant conditioning is used in real life. So reinforcement strategies are used in homes, schools, workplace, clinics, and animal training. These techniques help people learn new skills, improve performance, and reduce problem behaviors. The chapter demonstrates how learning principles can be applied in practical settings to eventually improve outcomes. Now, last and final chapter 10 explains observational learning, which occurs when people learn by watching others. Albert showed that children often imitate behaviors that are observed in adults and peers. I specifically know when I was younger, I would copy everything my mom did. Also, observational learning can teach both positive and negative behavior. I always say if when my mom would always do positive things, and that's why I ended up becoming a positive person and doing positive actions. But in general, observational learning can teach both positive and negative behaviors. Factors such as the model's success, popularity, and skill level influence whether the observer is likely to imitate the behavior. So in general, that is chapters 1 through 10. And yeah, learning and behaviors are important because they help explain why humans and animals act the way they do. And I know me reading all these chapters have made me understand humans even more and why we do certain actions and why we act the way we act. And it's really cool to know that. And yeah, so throughout these chapters, I've learned how behaviors change through experience, reinforcement, punishment, conditioning, and even observations. Understanding these principles allow me to better understand us and ourselves and the people around us. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope, yeah.